Despite my ability to reincarnate endlessly as a transmigrator, my wife remains adamant about compelling me to surrender my heart to her lover. If I refuse, she'll divorce me and thwart my efforts to ultimately win her affection. Just as I was on the verge of declining, my biological daughter, whom I've cared for over the past 8 years, kicked my leg and declared, "If you don't give Uncle David your heart, I won't recognize you as my dad." Upon my rebirth, I found myself with a new spouse. My previous wives became frantic in their search for me, with one descending into madness and another being confined to a mental hospital, constantly referring to everyone as husband. The third ended up in an orphanage, addressing everyone as dad. Eventually, I agreed to donate my heart to David. After enduring 3 hours in the frigid hallway during December, with temperatures plunging below 5 degrees Celsius, I finally succumbed. Clad only in thin home attire, my lips numbed by the cold, Sam opened the door and looked down at me, questioning if I was certain about my decision. I managed a faint smile, realizing that no matter my actions, I could never truly warm Sam's heart. Being task-oriented, I understood from the beginning that Sam had someone she cherished. After failing 2 missions consecutively, I heeded the system's advice and assumed the identity of David's twin brother. With a visage similar to David's, I successfully married Sam. For 8 years, I remained steadfast by her side, gradually earning her affection up to 99%. I believed I had achieved my goal until David returned to the country, requiring heart surgery. Sam demanded my heart, stating coldly, "I know you're an outsider. You won't actually die before completing the task. It's just a heart. When this body dies, you can change identities and come back to me." In that instant, everything became clear. Her affection was perpetually capped at 99%, and she was using this slight deficiency as leverage. When I refused, her affection diminished by 1 point. Ultimately, she bluntly stated, "Why bother? Even if you don't agree, you can't leave me. You have the system's mission. Until it's complete, you must continue to please me." She added, "If you comply obediently, I'll feel sorry for you and your affection will grow. Why not approach this more intelligently?" I laughed through my tears. Sam was exceptionally intelligent, boasting an IQ of 153. She became a leading heart surgeon at a young age, measuring love numerically, controlling everything like an experiment, and repeatedly forcing me to compromise using the slightest hope. At that moment, I realized Sam didn't hate me. She was merely cold-blooded and heartless. Even my biological daughter, whom I had nurtured for 8 years, echoed her mother's sentiments. If I didn't agree to give Uncle David my heart, she wouldn't recognize me as her father. Their hearts were like unyielding iron, incapable of being warmed. Given this reality, I no longer wished to waste another 8 years. I declared, "I've made up my mind. Since you want my heart, I'll give it to you," while silently requesting the system to assign me a new task target once this body died. The system inquired, "Host, are you sure you want to change your task target? After changing, you and Sam will have no further connection, but you'll be reborn with a new identity." I responded, "Yes, no further connection is acceptable. I don't wish to continue pursuing Sam." Sam showed a hint of surprise, not expecting me to agree so swiftly. She furrowed her brow, sensing something was amiss, but dismissed it and invited me to rest. As soon as I entered, my daughter Maria threw something at me and exclaimed from above, "Bad dad, fix this." On the table was a car model, evidently belonging to David's son. I couldn't help but sneer. This mother-daughter duo was truly devoted, even treating his son as their own. Seeing me smile, Maria frowned uncomfortably and demanded, "I want it fixed by tomorrow. Fix it now." I coldly turned away, refusing. "I won't do it. The car model was intricate, and repairing it wouldn't be possible in a single day. After spending 3 hours outside in the cold, my hands and feet were numb and stiff, barely allowing me to move. Maria grew angry, shouting, "Why are you so useless? You can't do anything. I already promised Lucas, and I need a good one for him by tomorrow. You have to do it today." In a detached tone, I responded, "Maria, I'm your dad, not your servant." I rarely disciplined Maria strictly. She had inherited her mother's high intelligence, and I never had to worry about her studies. Most of my attention was devoted to Maria's daily life, her clothing, food, and health, all meticulously managed. Yet, despite my efforts, Maria was perpetually dissatisfied, accustomed to my sacrifices, and now demanding more, expecting me to fulfill her every whim as if it were her right. In the past, I tolerated her behavior, but now I couldn't. Sam emerged from the kitchen and told Maria, "Let your dad rest tonight. We can do it tomorrow." At that moment, Sam reverted to her role as the dutiful wife, placing a hot water bottle in my arms and attempting to hold my hand, saying, "Why get angry with a child?" I slightly stepped back, avoiding her touch, and calmly stated, "I'm not angry with her." I realized I was merely informing Maria that I no longer intended to be her father. Sam's hand froze midair, and an awkward silence ensued. She frowned, having never seen me like this before. In her mind, I should have exploded with anger before eventually relenting, but I'd bypassed all that, accepting everything calmly as if I didn't care. She suggested, "Let's eat first," changing the subject and bringing out a bowl of fish soup from the kitchen. "Drink some soup to warm up," she offered. I glanced at the milky white soup, with tender fish pieces and a rich broth, one of Sam's finest dishes. Yet bitterness welled up inside me. "David is the one who likes fish soup," I remarked. Sam paused briefly before casually responding, Your preferences should be similar." I gave a self-deprecating smile. David and I had entirely different tastes, but Sam's mind, which typically retained only experimental data, had reserved a space to remember everything about David. I lowered my head and confessed, "I hate fish soup. I dislike the fishy smell. It's unpleasant. Drinking it feels like swallowing swill." Sam remained unfazed, calmly stating, "Eating fish is good for your heart." I tightened my grip on the spoon, recognizing that this was her primary concern. I said nothing more, forcing myself to drink the entire bowl before retreating to my room. Despite being married for 8 years, Sam and I slept in separate rooms because she claimed to have light sleep. I had volunteered to sleep in the guest room, a routine that had persisted for 8 years, likely because she didn't want to share a bed with me. But now I no longer cared. The next morning, I woke groggy, unaware of when I'd fallen asleep. A loud knock echoed at the door. "Dad! Bad Dad! Why aren't you up yet to make my breakfast?" My body felt heavy as I struggled to get up, realizing it was already 8 o'clock. Maria had school at 7:30, and I usually woke before 6 to prepare breakfast and her school necessities. Opening the door, Maria kicked my calf. At 7 years old, she had enough strength to cause pain, making me step back. Coldly, I asked, "Where's your mom?" The living room was empty, and no one else was in the room. Maria casually responded, "Mom went out. Her work is so important, unlike you, a low-level worker who's too lazy to get up and make me breakfast." Sam, a top heart surgeon in City A, worked tirelessly, often neglecting Maria. When Maria fell ill as a child, I took her to the hospital alone, running back and forth, sweating profusely. In the end, Maria recovered, but I became sick. When Sam learned of this, she coldly suggested, "Next time, remember to call the nanny." She had never cared for a child herself and couldn't understand the anxiety of having a child sick. A nanny could handle errands, but how could I trust one to provide the companionship and care a sick child required? Sam didn't comprehend this and merely blamed me for mishandling things. Now Maria felt the same way, declaring, "Uncle David is right. You're just a lazy, useless man, not a good dad at all." Children's words often lacked thoughtfulness, but their hurtful remarks stung deeply. I looked at her, the child I had raised with my own hands, who once hugged my neck as a little girl and swore she'd be my little cotton-padded jacket for life. Now this was her demeanor. I laughed bitterly, saying, "Maria, can't you see I'm sick?" Maria then noticed the pallor on my face, her expression as cold as Sam trees. Without concern, only displeasure, she stated, "So stupid, why did you have to get sick at this time? A person who can't even manage their health doesn't deserve to be my dad." With that, Maria turned and left with her backpack. I stood at the door, my head spinning, slowly leaning against the doorframe and crouching down as the door slammed shut. Bitter thoughts consumed me. Soon, I wouldn't be your dad anymore. In Chapter 3, I hastily swallowed 2 cold medicine pills and donned a mask before heading out. December's winter was truly harsh. I took a taxi to my company's building where my team members were already awaiting my arrival. One of them greeted, "Mr. Wong, you're finally here. The final design for the Wong degree collection hasn't been decided yet. We're waiting for your approval." I took the design draft from the assistant. Having been an art student, I worked as a designer for a clothing company post-graduation before launching my own brand. Although my company wasn't enormous, it was the result of my hard work. I prioritized the quality of design drafts, but this time some were poorly executed. Frowning, I remarked, "How did the company hire interns with such low standards?" The assistant looked uneasy, hesitated, and said, "Well, these are from your brother David." No surprise there. 3 months ago, David returned to China after divorcing his wife and bringing his son with him. Unable to secure a suitable job, my parents pressured me to offer David a director position at my company. David's skill level was insufficient even for an intern, let alone a director. Naturally, I resisted, but family pressure persisted, with them even visiting the company to cause disturbances. Eventually, I conceded and assigned him a designer role. Who would have thought he'd submit such subpar drafts? I promptly removed those drafts and instructed the assistant, "From now on, just make it appear as if you're working with his submissions. Don't bring them to me. I find them unbearable." Then I retrieved the design drafts I'd modified over the past few days from my bag and said, "Take these and discuss them with a few designers. See if they're good enough for the final collection." The assistant's eyes lit up upon seeing them. "Mr. Wong, you're too modest. This will definitely work. Everyone knows your level." I dismissed it as flattery and proceeded with the rest of my work. After the heart surgery, this body was destined to perish. Upon my death, the system would grant me a new body, and my company likely wouldn't survive either. Having worked hard for years, I planned to pass the company to my best friend. But before that, I wanted to complete the remaining work and remain on duty until the end. I worked until 2 p.m. when my stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten all day. Just as I was about to leave for lunch, the office door swung open. It was my father, looking travel-worn. Seeing me, his gaze was sharp as he said, "You're really here." Without further ado, he walked over and gave a short, decisive order. "Come with me to the hospital." I didn't move. This man was my biological father, the one who had personally expelled me from the Wong family. Both David and I were sons of the Wong family, but my parents only favored David. In their eyes, David was the obedient, sensible son, while I was the treacherous villain. When David falsely accused me of theft, no matter how much I protested, it was futile. Even when David set me up and ruined my reputation, dragging the Wong family down with me, they never suspected him. They blamed everything on me. Back then, he had stood before countless media cameras, ruining my reputation and declaring that the Wong family had only one son, David Noah. He had been expelled from the Wong family, and everything he did was unrelated to them. Everyone laughed at me as the abandoned family member, and now he stood before me again. He said, "David's condition has worsened. You need to go give him a blood transfusion." The office fell deathly silent. I wanted to ask how, after 7 years, he could still stand here so boldly. I questioned, what does his life or death have to do with me? My father's face turned ashen. He replied, "He's your real brother." I bitterly smiled and said, "Did you forget? 7 years ago, you kicked me out of the Wong family. I have no family left, no brother." His expression froze. The words he had spoken years ago had finally come back to haunt him like a boomerang. The man who had always been proud now lowered his head and pleaded, "The doctors say David's heart function is very poor and he's anemic. Only a blood transfusion can keep him alive. We still haven't found a heart donor. You must come with me and donate your blood." Looking at him, I felt an even deeper bitterness rise in my chest. I had never seen my father beg like this before. David truly was the apple of his eye. And it wasn't just him, was it? Sam and Maria. Didn't they also revere David? I smiled bitterly and agreed. Fine, I'll comply. But I set one condition. I want all the shares of the Wong family that David holds. My father's eyes turned cold. "Noah, don't be greedy." I responded, "That's my condition. If you don't agree, then fine." After a prolonged silence, my father finally conceded. He dragged me to the hospital without allowing any time to rest. Faint from hunger after an entire day without food, I was quickly taken to the blood donation room. The nurse noticed my pale face and kindly asked, "Are you experiencing low blood sugar? Do you need to rest or have something to eat?" But my father impatiently urged, "Hurry up." This private hospital was one my father had invested in, and his word was law here. The frightened nurse didn't dare to delay and swiftly prepared the blood collection equipment. As soon as the needle was inserted, dizziness overcame me. A severe cold, coupled with a day without food and low blood sugar, made it hard to breathe. My head uncontrollably tilted to the side. The nurse, horrified, cried out, "We can't continue. If we draw more, something will happen." My father's face darkened. He wasn't worried about my potential death, but concerned that without my blood, David would have none. He said, "Fine, stop here. Use what you have." I was escorted to the restroom, losing consciousness entirely. In a daze, unaware of how much time had passed, a woman burst in, slapped me hard across the face, and cried, "It's all your fault. What are you pretending for? What use is this little bit of blood?" The pain jolted me awake, and I saw my mother's swollen face, her hands grabbing me, punching me, and crying as she shouted, "Why did I have you two in the first place? If only it was just David. You're a curse. Even when you were in my womb, you took away David's nutrition, causing him to be born with heart disease. Now, when we need your blood, you're here acting like you're dying. Do you want your brother to die that badly?" Her cruel words pierced deeply into my heart. I, who had never cried, now felt cold tears streaming down my face. I had heard these words countless times since childhood, solely because David and I were twins, and David had heart problems. Everything was my fault. Taking the life resources that should have been his. No one in the family loved me. My wife and daughter hated me. From the moment I was born, I carried the original sin. Slaps continued to land on my face until my father intervened, blocking my mother. Seeing Sam, my father was also surprised and asked, "Why are you here?" Sam replied, "I heard David's condition is worsening, so I came to check on him. Don't worry too much. I've already found a heart donor for him, and he will recover soon." My mother, who had been crying moments ago, immediately stopped. She inquired, "Really? Where did the heart come from? Is David really going to be okay?" Sam reassured her again. "I have some other resources. I'll personally perform the surgery, and David will definitely be fine." Upon hearing that Sam would personally conduct the surgery, my heart trembled, followed by a bitter laugh. After my mother left, Sam, sensing the intense heat in my body, helped me to the hospital room. She thoughtfully prepared a blanket and hot water. I lay on the bed as Sam took my temperature. Seeing the thermometer read 41 degrees Celsius, she frowned and said, "You have a fever. Why didn't you call me?" I curled up and sarcastically replied, "The brilliant director Lou, the master healer, probably didn't expect that staying in a corridor with a temperature below 5 degrees Celsius for 3 hours could make someone sick." It wasn't that she didn't care. It was that she didn't care about me. The only thing she ever concerned herself with was the heart inside my body. Sam paused, then seemed to feel guilty and murmured, "I'm sorry." Her voice was so soft I thought I might have imagined it. She sat beside the bed and took my burning hand, whispering, I'm sorry. I promise that after this, I'll be with you and we'll live together properly. Whatever conditions you want, I'll meet them. I'll love you properly." I didn't look at her. Silently, I withdrew my hand. After an entire night of 4 drips, I began to feel better the next day. Sam didn't return to her hospital duties but stayed by my side, bringing over some medicine. The medicine was bitter, and I frowned as I swallowed it. Sam placed a glass of orange juice in front of me. I asked, "How long will it take for me to recover?" Sam answered, "Generally, a regular cold takes about 7 days to heal. You have a high fever, so it might take around 10 days." I asked again, "Will this delay the heart transplant for David?" I spoke casually, as if it were a trivial matter. Sam looked at me with a complicated expression, suddenly seeming like she didn't understand me anymore. She didn't respond immediately. I continued, "Even if I'm not healed, it won't matter, right? After all, once the heart is removed, I won't be alive anyway. Does a cold matter?" My words were cruel, yet I said them with unnerving calmness, like a cold blade. For some reason, Sam seemed distressed. She insisted, "I'll make sure you're healthy enough to undergo surgery, healthy enough to go under the knife, only to never come back." I didn't understand her insistence. Outside the room, my father entered, holding a stock transfer agreement. He threw the file heavily onto my face and coldly stated, "As you wished. All of David's shares now belong to you." This document included both mine and David's shares, totaling 20%, sufficient to secure a seat in the boardroom. I was satisfied and signed it. Once everyone left, I called my lawyer and said, "I'd like to arrange my inheritance." My lawyer, accompanied by my friend Kevin, entered. Seeing my pale, gaunt appearance, Kevin's anger flared. He cursed, "Bastards, how could they treat you like this? I'm going to make them pay." I stopped him. During my efforts to win Sam's heart, I hadn't encountered many good people, but Kevin was an exception. He always stood by my side, offering help no matter the circumstance. Kevin was also, apart from Sam, the second person to know about the system I was using. At this point, I explained to Kevin that I planned to change my target. He said, "So you're finally going to get rid of Sam, that scumbag?" I nodded. Kevin stood up excitedly. "That's great. The system is finally doing something useful. You should have dumped Sam earlier. Let her suffer." I couldn't help but laugh at him, then turned to the lawyer and said, "I want to leave all of my shares in Wong Corp. And some cash to Kevin. The rest, I want to donate to children in the mountains." The lawyer wasn't surprised, but still asked for protocol. "And what about your family?" I answered, "Not a penny for them." Kevin's eyes reddened as he said, "I'll hold on to everything for you for now. When you return with your new identity, I'll give everything back. You must come back." I nodded. Just then, Sam walked in and asked, "What do you mean by come back?" Her gaze was sharp. Unsure how much she had overheard, I hurriedly explained to Kevin that when I recovered, I'd be traveling abroad for a while. He also asked me to bring something back for him. Sam didn't show much expression, but scrutinized me for a moment before returning to her usual demeanor. She said, "Don't forget to go for the checkup later." I sighed in relief as Sam personally escorted me for the checkup, knowing it was to verify if my heart met the requirements for donation. After the checkup, I coincidentally ran into David, who was sitting in a wheelchair, his thin body clad in a hospital gown. His face was pale, and he coughed intermittently. Just his presence was heart-wrenching. Suddenly, David spoke. "Bro, I heard from my wife that they found a heart for me. Aren't you happy for me?" I looked into his black eyes, bright and innocent, yet filled with malice. Does he really not know anything? I replied, "Happy." I smiled sincerely, but seeing no reaction from him, David seemed somewhat dissatisfied. He casually raised his hand and said, "That's great. You've always had a bias against me. I thought you didn't want me to have the surgery." The ring on his middle finger was conspicuous, matching the one Sam wore on her wrist. I didn't pretend not to notice it. My gaze fixed on the ring as David quickly removed it, saying, Sorry, this is a gift I got from my wife when I went back to China. It doesn't mean anything. My finger swelled up because of the illness, so I wore it on my middle finger. You won't hold it against me, will you? As David suddenly began to cough violently, Sam exited the examination room and witnessed the scene. She quickly rushed over, shielding David behind her, and yelled at me, "What did you do to David? He's a patient. Why are you making things difficult for him?" I looked at her, whose emotions were wildly fluctuating, and gave a self-deprecating smile. It turned out that even the calmest and most rational people can lose control sometimes, all because of David's little cough. Without bothering to inquire about the context, she instinctively placed me in the role of the aggressor. This was my wife, the person I once loved deeply. My heart felt as if it were being tightly squeezed, suffocating. David continued to cough and said, "Sis-in-law, please don't be angry. My brother didn't do anything. He just mentioned the ring on my hand. Don't blame him for that." Sam's face darkened further as she stated, "The transplant date has already been set. Your little tricks won't change anything. I won't let anything interfere with David's surgery." She believed I was intentionally provoking David's condition to avoid donating my heart, but chose not to explain. There was no point in explaining. Sam would never listen. Silently, I turned around and returned to the hospital room, closing the door behind me. The only thing accompanying me was my design sketches. I loved drawing and designing, and my greatest wish these years had been to see my creations on the runway, even if just once. Fortunately, I received an invitation for next year's fashion show. Unfortunately, I probably wouldn't live until then. So, I wanted to finish my sketches before the surgery, at least to fulfill my wish. As I adjusted the designs, the medication began to take effect, making me drowsy. I casually placed the sketchbook beside my bed and drifted into a deep sleep. Upon waking, I heard rustling sounds nearby and saw a little boy holding a pencil, scribbling all over my design sketches. The once carefully completed designs were now completely ruined. I immediately sat up, grabbed the boy's hand, and scolded, "What are you doing?" The boy was startled and looked up. His face resembled David's by about 70%. It was David's son, Lucas. He shouted angrily, "You bad person! You made my daddy feel worse. I'm going to punish you for him. Bad person!" Lucas cried out, his voice sharp like nails scraping glass. I looked at my ruined work, my blood boiling. I couldn't care less whether it was a child or not. I yelled sharply, "Who told you to touch my sketchbook? Didn't your parents teach you that you shouldn't touch other people's things?" Lucas cried louder, shouting, "Help! The bad person is going to hit me! Help! Aunt Lou! Help! Grandpa! Help!" Within moments, my father and Sam burst into the room, pushing me aside. They were both strong, and I was thrown back hard against the headboard of the bed. My head throbbed with sharp pain, and my vision blurred. Maria, upon seeing Lucas with tear-streaked cheeks and red wrists, immediately turned and punched me twice, yelling, "Bad Dad, why did you hurt Lucas?" Lucas cried uncontrollably, his voice choked with sobs. Seeing that his uncle was sleeping, he wanted to cover him with a blanket, not understanding what he had done wrong, but fearing that his uncle would hit him. Lucas was nearly beaten to death. Hearing this, my father erupted in rage. "Noah, do you have any sense of decency left? How could you lay your hands on a child?" I remained silent, lowering my head and feeling the sticky blood at my hairline. My father didn't notice it and continued to scold me furiously. "Is this what I taught you? Why would you lay hands on a child?" My face turned pale as I looked up and asked, "If I say I didn't do it, would you lay hands on a child? Would you believe me?" Sam's voice was cold as she said, "Noah, stop lying all the time. Everyone can see what's happening." It was as if she was reminding me that this wasn't the time to argue, but to apologize properly. I let out a low laugh and looked at the child still crying, occasionally sneaking glances at us. I said, "Fine, I hit him. After all, no one would believe me anyway." My father, furious, raised his hand, but Sam quickly stopped him. I knew she was merely worried about my heart being harmed. Once the surgery date was set, I couldn't afford any setbacks. Sam pushed my enraged father out of the room, leaving only her, Maria, and me. Her face was cold as she said, "It's just a few pieces of paper. Why are you overreacting? Is it really that serious?" My body froze. A few pieces of paper referred to my work, my effort, the thing I loved. To Sam, it was just a few pieces of paper. Suddenly, I felt a sharp sting of ridicule. I had never realized how insignificant I was in their eyes. I clutched my chest, feeling deep physical pain. Being heartbroken to the extreme was genuinely painful. Sam's face changed slightly upon seeing my distress. She quickly helped me sit up and asked, "What's wrong? Don't get worked up. Just breathe. It's nothing really. If it bothers you that much, we won't mention it again. Just breathe." I told her to breathe, but I couldn't take it anymore. I pushed her away violently and shouted, "Get out, all of you, just leave." Sam, not daring to provoke me further, turned and left. Her face was grim. That night, after my emotions had somewhat settled, Sam returned with news. The surgery was scheduled for 10 days from then. I didn't react. Sam continued, "Originally, I wanted to wait until you got better, but you've been so uncooperative. At this rate, it will only get worse. 10 days from now is the best option." I silently nodded, as if accepting everything. Sam's expression softened, and after a brief pause, she said, "I'll be performing the surgery myself. After the anesthesia is administered, you won't feel any pain." I could hear rare tenderness in her voice. I looked up at her with a pale, frail face and asked, "Should I thank you?" Sam couldn't answer. I was already so thin, my cheeks sunken and lips pale, lying in bed. With the last bit of resistance in my eyes, I asked, "Sam, have you ever considered that I might actually die after the surgery?" Sam froze, standing motionless for a moment, feeling a flicker of panic for the first time, but quickly regained her composure. Rationally, she said, "It's already been confirmed. Until the task is completed, you won't really die. So stop trying to trick me with these words." The slight resistance I had in my eyes faded completely, turning dull and gray. This was my final effort. "Sam, there is no one in this world who will knowingly let their heart be trampled on, yet foolishly continue to give it away. At least, not me. From now on, I will completely disappear from your life." The room fell silent. Sam stared at me, and strangely, her heart seemed to ache in a way it never had before. But soon, she suppressed the pain. Her rationality told her this was just temporary. Once the surgery was over, everything would return to normal. She would make it up to me, and everything would be as it was before. I would be revived, and there would still be a chance. In Chapter 7, after that, I spoke very little. Every day was spent either sketching or staring out the window. The last 10 days passed as if I were merely counting down the hours, no longer attached to anything around me. Sam abandoned all her work to stay in the hospital, accompanying me through one test after another. Blood tests, medications, needles piercing my arm mercilessly. Yet I remained silent. The endless silence only seemed to heighten her anxiety. When passing by my hospital room, my father's expression was a mixture of confusion and anger. He asked, "What are you trying to do? Do you really need all these tests for a simple cold? Are you just pretending to make us feel sorry for you?" I didn't answer. My face had grown increasingly pale over the past days, and my body had lost much of its weight. My gaze never once turned toward him, and a surge of unspoken anger rose within my father. He said, "You've always been different from your brother. You're scheming, manipulative. Doing these things will only make us hate you more. The sensible thing would be to leave the hospital and disappear from our sight." As he spoke, my father roughly pushed me, already weak and frail. I lost my balance and fell, scattering the reports from my arms across the floor. My father was startled. He said, "What are you pretending for? I barely nudged you, and now you're trying to get sympathy from your own father." I didn't explain. Gritting my teeth to endure the pain, I bent down to pick up the scattered papers. They were all my test results. My father glanced at them, casually picking up one of the papers. He asked, "Why are you doing a heart ultrasound?" He was about to continue examining the other papers when David's voice came from behind. "Dad," he said in a wheelchair and looking weak, "don't be mad at my brother. He just wants you to care about him more. You've spent so much time with me. So of course my brother is upset. Let him be. I'm fine." As he spoke, David suddenly clutched his chest, gasping for air. Seeing this, my father immediately dropped the papers he was holding. "Poor kid, you're like this. And your brother still doesn't help but pretends to be sick. Why are you defending him? And if it weren't for him, would you even be born with this illness?" It was a facade of paternal affection, the image of a perfect family. But my heart was already numb to it. Behind me, Sam emerged from the report room. Upon seeing what had happened, her face changed drastically. She rushed forward, picked up the reports, and without a word, dragged me back to my room. As soon as we entered, a stack of reports was thrown at me. Sam's tone was grim as she asked, "Is this intentional? Did you drop the reports in front of David on purpose? Hoping he'd see the contents and feel guilty enough to refuse the surgery. Noah, how can you be so malicious?" Her cold words hit me like a hammer to the heart. I looked down, giving a bitter smile. "If you say so, then it must be true. After all, it didn't matter what I said. Whenever it came to David, Sam lost all rationality. After all, it didn't matter what I said. Whenever it came to David, Sam lost all rationality. My family, my lover, even my daughter, everyone only trusted David. No matter how much I explained, it would all be in vain." I silently returned to my bed and asked, "Do you need anything else?" Sam was silent for a moment, then her gaze fell on the nightstand, on the sketchbook Lucas had destroyed before David's surgery. She said, "He has one last wish to appear at the fashion show as a designer. You're supposed to participate next year, right? Why not give him your spot?" I looked up in surprise and asked, "Do you know this is also my dream? How long I've worked for this, and now you want me to give my spot to him? I can't agree to that." Sam furrowed her brows again. She said, "It's just one spot. What's the big deal? David isn't like you. He's afraid of the surgery. He just wants to fulfill a small wish before going under the knife. As his older brother, can't you at least satisfy this one request?" My fists clenched. How could she say this so lightly, as if all my efforts didn't matter? If David wanted something, everything had to be given to him. I responded, "I've already agreed to give him my heart. Now does he want to take my life's work too?" Sam's heart shook. Outside, I heard David's choked sobs. He said, "If you don't agree, I won't have the surgery. The surgery is so dangerous. What if I don't come out of it? I just want to fulfill a small wish. If you can't even grant that, I'd rather just die." My father quickly shook his head. "Silly child, how can you say such things?" He promised, "I promise you." After saying this, my father walked over to me and ordered, "This spot will go to your brother." His tone was final, not open for discussion. I refused to back down. The organizers invited me. This is my hard work. My father's face immediately darkened. He shouted, "David is your brother. Can't you stop being so selfish? Are you trying to kill him on purpose and enjoy it?" I stood my ground. "Fine, fine." My father repeated "fine" several times before pulling out his phone. "Don't listen. Fine. Don't even think about keeping your pathetic company. Do you want me to send someone to buy it out now? You care about your precious work so much? Think carefully. What's more important, your company or a single spot?" I trembled, staring at him in disbelief. This was my father, exploiting my weakness repeatedly, forcing me to compromise. My fists tightened. I knew that once my father said something like that, he could make it happen. Sam, standing by, also tried to persuade me to compromise. "You'll have another chance for a spot next time. Just let him have it this time." I laughed bitterly, looking at the people in front of me. My closest family, my wife, my relatives, my child, all siding with David. I replied, "Fine, I'll let him have it," then turned to the others and asked, "Are you all satisfied now?" Everyone breathed a sigh of relief and turned toward David. But I remained still, tilting my head back, closing my eyes, holding back tears as the light in my eyes slowly faded until it completely extinguished. Later that evening, Sam brought me a bowl of porridge, seafood porridge, my favorite. The aroma was strong and inviting, but I had no appetite. I lay motionless on the bed, and in the trash can, my sketches, which I had thrown away myself, lay discarded. Sam carefully brought the porridge to my mouth, but I didn't respond. I simply turned my head away, coldly. After a long silence, Sam set the porridge down and said, "Then eat it yourself." The room fell silent once again. I looked at the porridge on the table and, without a word, threw it into the trash can. The next day, I saw David waiting in the hallway, his eyes gleaming with smugness. He said, "Brother, what's the use of your talent? In the end, the opportunity is still mine." David sneered, "No matter how hard you try, it's all in vain. Everything I want, Dad, Mom, and even Sam, will be right in front of me. You've never enjoyed this kind of treatment, have you?" He suddenly burst into laughter, a cold, malicious smile on his face. "I wonder, after my surgery, if you'll still have the chance to see me on the runway." The look in his eyes was all too clear. He knew everything. He knew it all. I stared at him coldly and said, "Even if you get on stage, with your level, you'll only become a joke." David's expression darkened immediately. With no one around, his face showed no pretense. He sneered, "Instead of worrying about me, you should be more concerned about your good friend." I turned pale. "What do you mean?" David feigned innocence and said, "You still don't know. Your good buddy Kevin came to me talking all sarcastic. I just told Dad that I didn't like him, and it seems like Dad's going to take care of him. It might be tricky, but you know how Dad works. He can easily frame him with some tax charges. He won't be out of prison for 10 or even 20 years. I couldn't hold myself back any longer. I raised my hand and slapped him across the face, yelling, "You lunatic! What's your problem with me? Why target my friend?" David laughed carelessly. "Why shouldn't I? You don't have anything left for me to target, so I'll just make things hard for him. You can only blame yourself. You're the one who ruined your good buddy." "What does it have to do with me?" I raised my hand again, but before I could strike, I was forcefully pushed away. Sam arrived, quickly pulling David behind her. She shouted, "What are you doing?" Her eyes were filled with anger as she glared at me. "What has David done to you? Why are you trying to hit him again?" In the blink of an eye, David began to cough uncontrollably. He said, "Sam, it's not my brother's fault. It's just that I spoke carelessly and offended him. I don't mind if he hits me to vent his anger. I'm not in pain." David suddenly began to act as if he were struggling to breathe, pretending extreme discomfort, almost as if he were dying. Sam's face grew even darker. She shouted, "Noah, have you lost your mind? Why are you doing this to David? Look what you've done to him." But I couldn't care less. I had only one thing on my mind, to call Kevin and warn him to be on guard. I took out my phone, but before I could dial, Sam smashed it out of my hand. She bit her lip and said, "Do you even have a heart? At a time like this, you're still thinking about your phone. David's condition can't handle any more stress." The phone hit the ground, and the screen shattered instantly. I picked it up and saw it was completely dead. Unable to turn it on, Sam didn't acknowledge my actions. She grabbed my hand and said loudly, "David's condition is worsening. He needs to have surgery right away." That's when I noticed David clutching his chest, gasping for air, putting on a painfully exaggerated act. He tightly gripped Sam's clothes, but his eyes were smug, clearly enjoying the situation. It was all a show. I pulled away from her and tried to go to the nurse's station to borrow a phone, but Sam's people grabbed me and held me down, giving me no chance to resist. She yelled, "Do you want to back out now? There's no need to wait anymore. The surgery must happen immediately." They dragged me toward the operating room. I had no strength to resist, so I said to Sam, "I'm not backing out. Just let me make a call. It's urgent. Sam ignored me, assuming I was just stalling for time. I was helplessly strapped to the operating table, held down by several people. I begged again. Sam, please. Let me make just one call. It's just one call. Please. Sam's expression remained cold. Administer the anesthesia. The cold liquid was injected into my body, and I knew there was no chance left. My eyelids grew heavier, and the world around me went dark. Before losing consciousness, the last thing I saw was Sam's face. And with a cold, venomous gaze, I muttered, Sam, you won't have a good end. In the darkness, the cold, mechanical voice of the system echoed in my mind. Unfortunately, the affection is insufficient. Host's third task has failed. The current body is about to die. According to the host's wish, we have already selected a new target and are seeking an appropriate opportunity for reincarnation. Chapter 10. The cold alarm from the heart monitor beeped throughout the room. A nurse's voice rang out, Dr. Liu, the heart removal was successful. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief, but Sam's hand suddenly trembled. A wave of immense panic swept over her as she instinctively looked at the figure lying on the operating table. Noah's face was peaceful, lying there without a single breath. She had personally removed his heart. Sam suddenly felt dizzy, as though reality was slipping through her fingers. It wasn't until someone beside her nudged her that she snapped back to reality. Dr. Liu? Isn't it time for the transplant now? That's right, David was saved. Wasn't this what she'd always wanted? After 6 hours of surgery, Sam walked out of the operating room. Wong's father and mother were anxiously waiting outside, along with Maria and Lucas, all concerned about David's condition. Sam announced, the surgery was a success. Wong's father and mother immediately burst into tears, and Maria and Lucas jumped up in joy. No one inquired about Noah's whereabouts. Inside the operating room, David was wheeled out. Mrs. Wong followed the nurse to the ward, while Mr. Wong stayed behind to thank Sam. His eyes filled with tears as he grasped Sam's hand and said, Sam, you're truly a great daughter-in-law. If it weren't for you finding the heart and personally performing the surgery for David, it wouldn't have gone so smoothly. If I'd known, I should have had David marry you earlier. Actually, back then. He hesitated midway, then continued, Never mind, forget I said anything. Can you tell me who donated the heart? I'd like to thank their family properly. Just as he finished speaking, the operating room door opened. The nurse wheeled my body out, covered by a white sheet. As the nurse passed by Mr. Wong, the wind from the window blew a corner of the sheet up, revealing a hand with a birthmark. Mr. Wong froze. He asked, What's this? He recognized the birthmark. It was Noah's. He followed without a second thought. Sam swiftly stepped in, obstructing his view, and explained, Organ donations are kept anonymous by rule. Please refrain from asking Uncle Wong. Mr. Wong didn't dwell on it, possibly dismissing it as mere chance. In the corridor, Sam assumed the nurse's responsibilities, personally moving Noah's body to the morgue. Inside the chilly morgue, she lifted the white sheet to examine Noah's pale face. A gruesome injury scarred his chest, even though she knew he wasn't truly dead. Watching Noah lie cold and still in the morgue, Sam felt as though she had genuinely lost him. A wave of delayed sorrow washed over her. She held his hand, attempting to soothe herself as she whispered, It's okay. You'll come back. You love me so much. You'll definitely return. Even if you hesitate, the system ensures you stay until the task is complete. Lowering her head, she rested her forehead against Noah's cold one and softly promised, When you come back, we'll live happily together. If it were the old Noah, he would have gently stroked her face and said, Okay. But now, only endless silence responded. Based on her experience, Sam believed Noah would return within 3 days. He would occupy a different body and live under a new identity. Sam was confident that no matter what form Noah took or what identity he adopted, if he appeared beside her, she would unquestionably recognize him. When Sam exited the morgue, she noticed Maria standing at the doorway. Maria looked inside awkwardly and asked, "Did Dad pass away?" Sam replied, "He'll be back in a few days." Maria didn't say anything more and entered the morgue. She pulled back the white sheet, and despite being prepared, she still looked pale with red eyes. Without a word, she turned and fled the room. In David's hospital room, he was gradually waking up from anesthesia. He touched his chest, appearing somewhat confused, and asked, "Am I just a normal person now?" Sam nodded. David immediately shed tears of gratitude, looking at Mr. and Mrs. Wong and saying, "Mom, Dad, Sam, thank you so much." A joyful atmosphere filled the room. David wiped his eyes and suddenly asked, "Where's Noah? My illness is cured, and I'm sure Noah would be happy. I want to tell him." Sam's expression changed slightly. Mr. Wong snorted disdainfully and said, "Who knows where he's gone? Ever since you went into surgery, he hasn't shown up. He didn't even care about his own brother." A hint of realization flashed in David's eyes. Still uneasy, he asked Sam, "Sam, is my brother angry with me?" Sam didn't know how to respond. No matter how she explained it, Noah was gone. His identity had ceased to exist. She didn't answer, but instead tried to comfort him, saying, "Just rest." "Okay." Then she left the room. That evening, Mr. Wong went outside for a smoke. He saw a nurse cleaning an adjacent room which was empty. Unable to contain his curiosity, he asked, "Where did the person in there go?" The nurse shook her head. "I don't know, I'm just here to clean. Are you a family member? There's a piece of paper left on the bed. You can take it." The nurse handed him a form. Mr. Wong took it and saw that it was a compatibility test. The results showed that Noah's heart was a perfect match for David's. In the cold night, his hand trembled as he held the cigarette. He mumbled, "What is this?" The nurse, thinking he didn't understand, explained, "It's a compatibility test. The donor and recipient match perfectly." Mr. Wong's hands began to shake. He reviewed the form repeatedly. The names Noah and David were clearly and unmistakably written. In that moment, memories of the numerous tests Noah had undergone flooded back. He recalled the test results he had found outside the hospital room, the body covered by a white sheet outside the operating room. The wind had blown the sheet up, revealing that familiar birthmark on the hand. Mr. Wong's hand trembled, and the form fell to the ground. Stumbling, he turned and rushed toward the morgue, nearly falling along the way. When he opened the morgue door, he saw Noah lying silently on the slab, his face drained of color. Mr. Wong stumbled and fell. Sam rushed to catch him, blocking his view. But before she could explain, Mr. Wong pushed her aside and finally breaking down, asked, "What is going on?" Sam remained silent. He demanded, "You said you found a heart source. Was it Noah's heart? What have you done?" Sam explained that David's condition was dire, and the heart was hard to come by. Mr. Wong shouted, "So you just let Noah die no matter what? He's my son, and he's your husband." Sam looked up at Mr. Wong and replied, "This was the only way to save David. If you were the one who had to choose, would you have made a different decision?" The morgue fell into silence. No answer was the best answer. Wong's father staggered back a few steps, realizing something. Finally, he covered his face and cried out, "I'm sorry, Dad, I'm sorry." He apologized to Noah's body. Sam said nothing and silently leaned against the wall. After a long time, she finally spoke. "I'm sorry for him. I've already bought a plane ticket to leave. Once David is discharged, I will take Noah's ashes and leave here. You know, he didn't want to see you all." After saying this, Sam turned and left. Days later, when she returned to her familiar home, Sam still felt a sense of disorientation. After all, she had lived with Noah for 8 years, and traces of him were everywhere in the house. On the wall hung their wedding photo, where Noah was smiling so brightly, so full of life. Sam felt a pang of discomfort and decided to go downstairs to buy something. As she passed by a woman in the neighborhood, the woman asked, "Sam, I haven't seen Noah around lately." Sam didn't know how to answer and said, "He went back to his hometown." Why did he go back? He told me last time that you were staying up too late and not taking care of yourself, and that I should bring you a free-range hen from the village to make soup for you. I brought the chicken back. Did he forget? It's fine, you can take it. Sam looked at the chicken the woman handed her, suddenly feeling a mix of emotions. Thank you, she said. She went upstairs in silence. The large house was eerily quiet. She wasn't a talkative person and had always been used to silence at home, but Noah would always talk to her about everyday things. Most of the time she found it annoying, but now that the sound had disappeared, she realized how silence could become a form of torture. In a daze, the door opened. Sam instinctively stood up and said, "Torture." In a daze, the door opened. Sam instinctively stood up and said, "Noah, you're back." But as soon as the words left her mouth, she froze. At the door stood Maria, who frowned and threw her school bag on the ground. "Mom, I'm hungry." Sam, not in the mood to cook, took out her phone to order takeout. After eating a bite of the takeout, Maria put her chopsticks down and said, "This tastes awful. Why is Dad still not back?" Sam knew Maria was picky, but she hadn't expected her to be this particular. "Tomorrow I'll have the nanny come over to cook. You'll have to eat this tonight." Maria didn't touch her food again. Turning and returning to her room the next morning, Maria slept until noon and instinctively yelled, "Dad, why didn't you wake me up?" Only when the words left her mouth did she remember that Noah wasn't there anymore. Maria suddenly fell silent. She took a bite of the dumplings made by the nanny, but immediately spat them out. "I want to eat Dad's cooking. This doesn't taste like what he made." The living room fell into silence. Sam didn't speak, and Maria also seemed to understand, stopping her complaints. After a long while, Maria's eyes turned red. She asked, "Mom, when is Dad coming back? Didn't you say he would come back in a few days?" "Yes, 3 days. According to Sam's experience, Noah would reappear after 3 days. Tomorrow would be the 3rd day after Noah's surgery, so they only had to wait 1 more day." Sam comforted her daughter. "It's almost time." As the day approached, Sam felt no joy, but instead grew uneasy. During these 3 days, she had been more acutely aware than anyone else of Noah's absence, and there was nothing she could do. She could only wait passively. Finally, the 3rd day arrived. She had stayed awake until midnight and, with no desire to sleep, put on some clothes and went out. She had no particular destination, just hoping to run into someone, maybe even Noah. But from midnight to the early hours of the morning, she walked around her neighborhood and all the places Noah usually went, but didn't see anyone who resembled him. Her anxiety grew larger and larger. It wasn't supposed to be like this. In the past, Noah had quickly returned after changing identities, and as long as he reappeared, no matter what his new look was, Sam could always recognize him instantly. The sun rose, and Sam, exhausted, finally made her way to the hospital. David had recovered very well. His face had regained color, and he could walk now. When he saw Sam, his eyes filled with joy. "Sam, are you here to see me?" Distracted, he looked around the hospital. There were many people, and she was trying to spot Noah among them. Suddenly, a man who resembled Noah appeared in her line of sight. Sam instinctively stood up. But before she could approach, David grabbed her sleeve, looking hurt. "Sam, why are you ignoring me?" Sam quickly shook him off and shouted, "Noah!" She rushed toward the man, grabbing his hand. But the stranger, startled, pulled away and asked, "Who are you?" It felt like cold water had been poured over her head. It wasn't Noah. Sam stood frozen in place, watching the man walk away, constantly questioning, "Where is Noah? Why hasn't he shown up?" Nearby, Wong's mother hurried over, disapproving. "Sam, what's wrong with you? David just had surgery and you're acting like this. Do you want him to have an accident?" David immediately defended Sam. "Mom, it's not Sam's fault. She's just worried about my brother. I don't know where my brother went." Wong's mother's face darkened. "Who knows where he went? He hasn't even shown up to care about you since your surgery. It's better if he just stays away." Her words sent Sam into a rage. Her eyes turned red and she shouted, "Shut up!" Wong's mother was startled. It was the first time she had seen Sam like this. She asked, "Did I say something wrong? Since David's surgery, where has Noah been? He's just a selfish, cold-hearted person. I should have never had him. It would be better if he never appeared again." Sam's face grew even darker. She clenched her fists and whispered, "No, he will definitely come back." The expression in her eyes frightened Wong's mother, who didn't understand what was happening. When they returned home, Maria immediately asked anxiously, "Has Dad come back?" Sam ignored her and went straight into the room. Entering Noah's room, Sam finally noticed that the framed photo that used to sit on the bedside table was now just an empty frame. The only photo of them together had been torn apart, the pieces lying in the trash can. It was Noah who had torn it before leaving. Sam suddenly trembled, as if she understood something. She squatted down and took out all the pieces, her hands shaking as she tried to piece them back together. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't restore it to its original state. In the pitch-black night, Sam lay on the floor of Noah's room, her mind in a daze as if she could see him again in the afterlife. The system was displaying Sam's image before her. The system asked, "Do you want to go back and see?" She hesitated, then a soul-like figure appeared by Sam's side. Sensing something, Sam looked around and asked, "Noah, is it you? Have you come back?" There was no response. In fact, even if she spoke now, Sam wouldn't be able to hear him. The figure just looked at her, somewhat confused, not understanding why she was reacting so strongly. "I thought that after my death, Sam would at most feel a little lost, surrounded by David. She should quickly forget everything and stay by David's side. But in these 3 days, she had spent very little time with David." The system asked, "Host, her favorability towards you has reached 100. As long as you appear in front of her, the task will be completed immediately. Do you want to change the target?" In the darkness, Sam whispered, "I regret it." She gave a self-mocking laugh, her voice choking as she said, "I regret it. I really regret it. Please come back." All she received in return was silence. After a long while, the system spoke. "Change. I can no longer trust Sam. Moreover, the hurt I've experienced won't disappear, and the pain in my heart won't fade. Why should Sam be forgiven?" A flash of white light appeared. "And I know that my new life is about to begin." She closed her eyes without any attachment. It wasn't until the next day that Sam woke up, disoriented and devastated. Maria, with red eyes, sat in the living room and asked, "Has Daddy not come back yet?" No matter how mature, she was still just a 7-year-old child. From indifference at the start, to anger, and then to sorrow, Maria choked as she asked, "Does Daddy not want me? Does he not want Mommy anymore?" Sam's heart felt as if it had been cruelly twisted. She whispered, "No, that's not true." But her voice was so low, so weak, and so lacking in conviction. At the hospital, Sam went to the morgue again as it was the only place she could hold on to something. But when she entered, she found it empty. Sam went mad, shouting, "Where is he? Where did Noah go?" The young nurse, scared out of her wits, trembled as she said, "He's been taken away. They said they're taking him to the crematorium, just moved him." Sam suddenly went berserk and ran out. David came over, trying to grab her, but she was knocked down to the floor in the process. David shouted her name. Sam paused, and upon seeing David, her eyes were filled with confusion and pain. David asked, "Sam, what happened to you?" Sam didn't answer. After hesitating for a long time, she turned and walked away. When she reached the hospital entrance, Kevin was there with the funeral home staff, loading her body into the car. Sam suddenly rushed over, pushing everyone aside and shouting, "Get away! Who told you to touch him?" Kevin, with red eyes, glared at her and said, "Noah is already dead. Do you want him to never have peace?" Sam's body shook. She then shook her head, saying, "No, he's not. He'll come back." She didn't know how to bring him back. She could only deceive herself, thinking that if she kept his body, maybe one day a miracle would happen. Kevin couldn't hold back any longer. He slapped her hard and angrily shouted, "What right do you have to say that? Do you think Noah is lying here because of me?" He shouted, "And now you're pretending." Kevin's words were like daggers to the heart. Sam trembled all over, her head lowered as she sobbed quietly, unable to refute anything. Behind her, her mother came over, bewildered, and asked, "What's going on? What's all this fuss about at the hospital entrance?" Only then did her mother notice the funeral home's car parked nearby, with a body wrapped inside. Since it was already covered, her mother didn't realize it was her. She frowned in disdain and continued questioning. "David's feeling a bit unwell and wanted you to check on him. Why aren't you concerned? I even thought you were a good girl and wanted David to marry you." Nearby, Kevin sneered, "Taking your elder son's wife for your younger son. You really are a great mother." The sarcasm in his words was evident. Her mother's expression instantly darkened. She said, Wait a minute. You're Noah's friend, right? This is a family matter. What does it have to do with you? Also, how much longer is Noah going to stay dead? Why doesn't he come out himself, causing this ruckus? Tell him, if he's got the guts, he should die out there and never come back." Kevin's eyes turned red with anger. He then turned to Sam and asked, "Is it an accusation? Ask your good daughter-in-law." Her mother's face grew even whiter. She looked at Sam, but Sam just lowered her head. Then she looked at David, who was desperately shaking his head, claiming to know nothing. Her mother's chest heaved as she continued to refute. "This can't be. How could this be? You're just talking nonsense." Before she could finish her sentence, Kevin pulled her in front of the funeral home's car. He unzipped the body bag, revealing her corpse. Her father rushed over but was still a step too slow. Her mother let out a blood-curdling scream, her body going limp as she stared at the person in front of her. Her father shouted as he rushed forward, "Let go of her!" He tried to hold her up and block her view, but it was too late. Her mother's eyes widened in disbelief as she stared at the person before her. Her mouth hung open, unable to find words for a long time. She could barely stand, leaning on her father, feeling like something inside her mind had snapped. She muttered, "How is this possible? How could this—" Kevin sneered, "Take a good look. David's life was bought with your other son's life." These words were a direct blow to her heart. Her mother couldn't take it anymore, letting out a final heart-wrenching wail before collapsing unconscious. David's face wasn't much better than his mother's. Kevin walked up to him, and David, terrified, stepped back. He finally braced himself against the wall, looking at Kevin in fear. He stammered, "I don't know. I really don't know anything." Still pretending, even now. Kevin almost wanted to tear his face apart, but that would be too easy. He looked at David, speaking each word deliberately. "Do you think you've won? Noah died because of you. From now on, your parents, your children, everyone will remember this fact. You'll forever be a sinner, never able to hold your head high in front of Noah, and no one will ever unconditionally favor you again." For the first time, true fear appeared on David's face. His legs gave way, and he collapsed onto the floor. Seeing this, Kevin turned around and pushed his body into the car, then asked the lifeless Sam standing beside him, "I've already found a grave for Noah. You'll never find it. Never show up at his grave." Her eyes were dirty. Sam seemed to have had her soul sucked away, standing in pain and confusion. She murmured, "He really won't come back, will he?" She didn't believe it. Sam looked around, ignoring the strange stares of the people around her. She shouted loudly, "Don't you have a system? Didn't it say you couldn't leave until the task was completed? Why? System, come out. Why didn't he come back this time?" The people passing by thought she had gone mad. David, frightened, looked at her and cautiously spoke. "Sam." Sam suddenly shoved him away. Her eyes were bloodshot, staring fixedly at David's chest, where Noah's heart was beating. It was all because of David. If it weren't for that surgery, Noah wouldn't have disappeared and nothing would have happened. She had never regretted anything as much as she did now. David was startled and stumbled back. Sam's gaze felt like she was trying to dig his heart out. Once back in the hospital room, David's face had lost all color. His mother had already regained consciousness, but was still dazed. When she looked at David lying on the bed, she suddenly shouted, "Noah!" David's face instantly turned pale. He trembled for a while, then whispered, "It's all my fault. I killed my brother. I'll return his heart to him. I'll pay with my life." Saying this, David grabbed a fruit knife from the bedside table, intending to stab himself in the chest. His father hurriedly stopped him. In the past, his mother had always been the one most heartbroken over her son, but now she just coldly looked at him and said, "Noah is dead. What are you trying to do this for? Who are you doing this for?" David's body stiffened. Before, his mother had never spoken to him like that. Now, her cold words stung deeply, and he realized how harsh they could be. His father, with red eyes, also said, "This is Noah's heart. No matter what you do, you cannot harm this heart." David looked at him in disbelief. The two people who had once loved him the most had completely changed their attitude. He had switched places with the old me. In his panic, David saw Sam standing at the door and said, "Sam, do you blame me too? Do you think I killed my brother? But I didn't know anything. Why are you all blaming me?" David's eyes reddened, feeling incredibly wronged. If this were the past, everyone in the room would have rushed to comfort him. But now no one moved. Sam just looked at him and asked, "You really don't know?" David was completely abandoned by everyone. His mother no longer had the heart to stay by David's side in the hospital. She spent her days in a daze. The next day, she was sent home. His father also couldn't focus on caring for David anymore and made an excuse to return to the company. Sam's mental state was deteriorating too. She didn't believe he was dead. She spent all her time trying every possible way to find him, searching for the system, desperate for an explanation. It wasn't until her friend could no longer stand it that they went out for drinks to ease her mind. While crossing a street, they happened to spot him standing under a street lamp, and every move he made was just like David's. Sam suddenly jumped to her feet, rushing toward the door without thinking. Cars zoomed past the street, and Sam was only saved when her friend grabbed her into time. But when she looked again, the figure was gone, panicked. Sam didn't stop to think about whether what she had seen was real or just an illusion. She dashed across the street in search of the man. At that moment, I had already become David. I had switched to a younger body and was waiting for my new target in a cafe. This target was also the person I was supposed to marry in this life. The system had told me that this task would be easy, almost like a compensation. But just before the person arrived, a figure appeared before me, leaving me stunned. Noah Wong. Sam had chased me all the way to this cafe, seeing me sitting by the window. The longing and emotions she had been holding back came flooding out as she threw herself at me. I froze, then quickly reacted, pushing Sam away. "I'm sorry, but I don't know you." Since I had switched bodies, I hadn't seen Sam, nor had I intentionally kept up with any news about her, so I didn't know how much she had changed. Now, looking so worn out, once meticulous and almost obsessive about cleanliness, now she reeked of alcohol with deep circles under her eyes and tears streaming down her red face. The look she gave me was one of someone seeing a long-lost treasure. I stepped back, surprised I hadn't expected Sam to be so devastated by my departure. Wasn't she supposed to be happy she had the chance to be with David now? I couldn't understand, nor did I want to dwell on it. I quickly regained my composure and calmly said, "Miss, I think you've mistaken me. My surname is Jean, not Wong." Looking into my unfamiliar eyes, Sam stood there, stunned. How could this be? She couldn't have mistaken me. From across the glass, she had seen the way I sat, how I drank my coffee, even the small movements I made. Everything was identical to Noah. How could I not be Noah? In the time it took for her hesitation, I stood up and left my seat. Sam hurried to follow, but a bodyguard appeared out of nowhere and blocked her. I got into a car, maintaining my cold and distant expression. Sorry, I really don't know you. Please don't look for me again. With that, the car door closed. The world grew quiet. I leaned back in my seat, rubbing my temples. I asked the system, how did she find me? The system replied, she's been looking for you, going to crowded places to increase the chances of a reunion. It was just a coincidence. I was speechless. Then I sighed. If it were before, I would have been overjoyed knowing how much Sam cared for me. Now I only feel that this belated affection is nothing but hollow. Sam only regrets now, but it is too late. When I returned to the Jean household, as soon as I entered the door, I saw my mother rushing over, worried. My dear son, I heard from the bodyguard that you encountered a crazy person today. Are you all right? Was it scary? Did they hurt you? She looked me over carefully, her expression full of concern. Only when she was sure I was fine did she pat her chest and say, that really scared me. How can there still be mad people wandering around in broad daylight? Looking at my mother, who was so concerned about me, warmth filled my heart. The system had indeed given me a good family. My parents loved me, and I had 2 sisters who doted on me. Even the woman I was supposed to marry was someone I had known since childhood, Anna, the marriage partner arranged by the system. Everything was so happy. Remembering our interrupted meeting earlier, I spoke up, but I didn't get to meet Anna today. She immediately said, no rush, I'm very close with Lee's mother. I've already invited them over for dinner, so you'll get to meet her tonight. I smiled, trusting the system and her words. Anna was a good person. It seemed this task wouldn't be too difficult. On the other side, Sam, disappointed, returned home and mobilized all her resources to find David. Soon, Mr. Wong replied, Sam, this person is David Jean, the young master of the Jean family. Why are you looking for him? Sam stared at the photo of David, her fingers trembling. She said, no, he's Noah. Mr. Wong was shocked and thought Sam had lost her mind. He was about to try and console her, but Sam had already left. 3 days later, at the charity gala, I, as one of the invited guests, attended the event. Standing beside me was Anna, wearing a fishtail dress, her smile captivating. We both appeared at the gala, and rumors about a potential marriage between the Jean and Lee families were subtly confirmed. All eyes turned to us, offering praises of a perfect match. But in the corner, Sam stared at the scene, her eyes bloodshot. She didn't believe the man in front of her wasn't Noah. Downing the glass of wine in her hand, Sam walked toward me. Having drunk a little, my face felt warm, and I was looking for a quiet place to cool off when I saw her walking toward me. The slight intoxication in my brain immediately cleared, and I stood up straight. Sam looked far more composed than she had when I'd seen her a few days ago, probably because she had prepared for this moment. When she got close, she politely spoke. Mr. Jean? I nodded slightly in return. Sam's eyes remained fixed on me as she said, Mr. Jean looks very much like someone I used to know. The evening breeze cleared my head, and I asked, who? She replied, my husband. I smiled. In the past, Sam never liked to admit in front of others that I was her husband because her heart belonged to David. The only person she had ever wanted to marry was him. Now, in front of me, she was admitting I was her husband. But it was too late. I politely responded, then you must have mistaken me. Why is it impossible? She asked. Because you love me. Sam suppressed her emotions and continued, you clearly love me. How could you be engaged to someone else? This must be fake, right? You're doing this to make me angry. I know I was wrong. I will never hurt you again. Please take the ring off. By the end, Sam was almost begging me. I couldn't help but feel disgusted. She knew everything. She knew how much I had once loved her and how much pain I had suffered. But she simply never cared. When I loved Sam the most, all I got in return was endless pain. Now Sam was standing in front of me, saying all these words. What did it even mean? I spoke. You say he's your husband, the one who loved you so much. Then where is he now? Sam froze in place. Noah was dead. No one knew better than her. He had died on her operating table. He died at her hands. The heavy truth caused her unbearable pain. She couldn't even look at me, let alone beg for anything from me, but she was so unwilling to accept it. After all, Noah had loved her so much. She said, I hurt him, now I regret it. I just want to ask for his forgiveness. Tell me, how can I get his forgiveness? As she spoke, it was as though she were breaking down entirely. The door to the lounge opened again and Anna entered, sensing the strange atmosphere. What's going on? Seeing her, I immediately gave a faint smile. In front of Sam, I put my arm around Anna and said, This lady mistook me for her husband. She's asking me if, after hurting her husband, she can still ask for his forgiveness. Anna, do you think her husband... She's asking me if, after hurting her husband, she can still ask for his forgiveness. Anna gave me a long, thoughtful look and then answered, A woman who truly loves a man would never hurt him. If she has already hurt him, she has no right to ask for forgiveness because the harm has been done, and time cannot turn back to undo everything. Those who hurt the ones they love are destined to lack the capacity to love, and do not deserve to be loved in return. Every word Anna said was exactly what I wanted to say. I turned to Sam and asked, Miss Lou, do you understand now? Spilled water cannot be retrieved and a broken mirror cannot be mended. If you truly can't let him go, you should take good care of your child. At least that would be a way to make amends to him. With that, I took Anna's hand and left. As we walked by the dessert table, I hesitated before finally speaking. Aren't you going to ask me something? Anna remained calm, picking up a piece of dessert and saying, When you're ready to talk, you'll tell me. If you don't want to, forcing you won't help. Besides, I trust you. Anna's expression was serious as she added, Whenever you're ready to share, I'll be here. Listening patiently, I looked at her and took the dessert from her hand. It was all my favorite flavors. Suddenly, I spoke up. Anna, will you marry me? The wedding date was set quickly. I took another step towards a new life. Meanwhile, the Wang family was filled with a heavy atmosphere. David had been discharged from the hospital, but he wasn't happy. The home was shrouded in a sense of oppression. Wong's mother would often sit and stare blankly at Noah's photo. One day, she went into Noah's old room again and started cleaning the few belongings he had left behind. Noah had very little in the Wong household. When the Wong family had kicked him out, Noah had packed most of his things. The rest were thrown away, and whatever was left behind was shoved into the storage room. After Noah's death, Wong's mother retrieved his things from the storage room and placed them back in his old room. She even ordered custom bedding and decorations that Noah had used, redecorating the room to look just like it did when he was living there, as if he were still around. David saw this and felt a mixture of grievance and frustration. Why should Noah receive all the love only after he was gone? He approached the doorway and spoke hoarsely, Mom, come downstairs and eat something. Wong's mother, however, coldly responded, I'm not eating. David ran over, knelt down, and looked at her, pleading, Mom, all of it is my fault. Please don't hurt yourself. I owe Noah. But she needed to eat. Wong's mother suddenly pushed him away and slapped him hard across the face. She shouted, It's your fault. Her voice broke as she screamed at David. If it weren't for you, Noah would still be alive. Still be alive. My Noah. David collapsed to the ground, unable to believe what was happening. Wong's mother had never slapped him before. Now she was hitting him for Noah. David could no longer control himself and furiously questioned, What does this have to do with me? I wasn't the one who performed the surgery. I wasn't the one who came up with the idea. Didn't you say that my heart disease was caused by him in the first place? So he gave me his heart. What's wrong with that? Wasn't I your most beloved child? Why are you hitting and cursing me over such a worthless person?" Wong's mother's face turned red with fury, and she gasped for breath. Just then, Wong's father, who had just returned home, heard the commotion. He rushed in and helped Wong's mother up, kicking David away as he shouted, "You bastard! We really spoiled you. No matter how bad Noah was, he was still your biological brother. He gave his life for you, and you have the nerve to say such things." David stared at them in disbelief. He pressed his chest and loudly claimed he was having trouble breathing, just like before. But all he got in return was a cold glare from Wong's father, who said, "Your condition is fine now. This heart is Noah's. It's perfectly healthy." Who would believe this act? David's expression twisted completely. In his mind, after the surgery, everything should have fallen into place. The parents' favoritism, Sam's confession. He thought it would all naturally come to him. But the reality was that he lost everything. Why was this happening? David clenched his fists in frustration, unwilling to accept it. Meanwhile, news of the Jean Lee family's engagement quickly spread through their circles. When Sam heard the news, her eyes turned red with anger and sorrow. A woman who usually avoided drinking was now getting drunk at a bar, lying on the floor murmuring my name and whispering apologies. The warm, happy home she once had was now empty, just a desolate echo. On the day of the engagement, Anna and I appeared side by side, receiving everyone's well wishes. I made my rounds, toasting with guests. After a few rounds, I started to feel worn out. So I turned to Anna, excusing myself and heading to the lounge. As soon as I stepped into the lounge, a figure lunged at me. "Dad," it was Maria. At that moment, she was completely different from the aloof, cold girl I used to know. Her eyes were red, and she clung to my coat as though terrified I might disappear. She said, "Dad, don't you want me anymore?" Seeing Maria, my heart instinctively tightened. She was my child, after all. I sighed and took out a tissue to wipe her tears, then adjusted her disheveled clothes. I looked at Sam and asked, "Is this how you take care of her? Her shoes are dirty, her clothes out of season, and her hair looks like it hasn't been washed in days." Most concerning was that she looked so much thinner. Sam seemed pleased that I finally acknowledged her identity. Smiling, she said, "I'm so useless. I can't do these things right. Maria has always been taken care of by you. She can't live without you." I silently looked at her. I had already guessed Sam's intention in bringing Maria to see me. She was simply trying to use the child to bind me to her. But I had already made up my mind to let go of everything from the past. I gently looked at Maria and said, "You're a smart girl, and you're very capable. Even without your father, you'll be just fine." Maria immediately began crying, choking out, "No, I don't want that. Aren't you my dad? Why don't you want to take care of me? Why don't you want me? Is it because I didn't listen to you? I know I was wrong. I'll listen from now on. Please don't leave me. Don't leave Mom." She was still just 7 years old. Losing her father was undoubtedly painful for her. I gently stroked her hair. Then I turned to Sam and said, "You shouldn't have brought her here. This would only hurt Maria more." Sam, with nothing but me in her eyes, whispered, "Even if you can't forgive me, even if you hate me for the rest of your life, please don't leave me." I knew that if I didn't clear things up once and for all, Sam would never give up. I spoke softly. "Sam, you're just not used to it. We've been living together for 8 years. It's normal to feel lost at first, but time will heal everything. David is still waiting for you." She snapped, "No, it's not like that." Suddenly, Sam became emotionally agitated, shouting, "I love you. I only understand now. I can't live without you." I looked at her with a bitter smile and said, "Then why did you hurt me over and over again back then?" "You know, I don't want anything from you. I just want you to like me," she continued. "You said you've liked me for a long time, and I believe that. But your affection is too shallow. You always keep your feelings for me at 99%, always dangling that 1% over me." I said each word clearly. "I'm a person. I can feel pain and exhaustion. Why do you think I'll keep giving unconditionally?" Sam shook her head in agony. Suddenly collapsing on her knees, she trembled as she begged, "It's not like that. I'm just afraid. I'm afraid you only stay with me because of the system. I'm afraid that once the affection reaches 100%, you'll leave. I can't lose you. I just can't lose you." The painful memories of the past seemed to drown her once again. I pushed Sam away and shook my head. "But what's done is done, Sam. You've already hurt me so deeply. Don't bother me anymore. I just wanted to start a new life." Seeing the pain on my face, Sam looked as if she had been struck by a heavy blow. She collapsed on the floor in despair, exhausted and defeated. I spoke up. "Today is my engagement party. If you still feel even a little guilty, don't ruin the little happiness I have left." Sam could no longer say a word. She finally understood. She had caused irreversible harm to Noah, and now there was no turning back. I disappeared into the lounge. Maria stood nearby, watching all of this in silence. Deep down, she had already realized that she would never have a father again. Suddenly, an overwhelming wave of sadness and grief rushed in. She turned and punched Sam. "It's all your fault. You chased Dad away. Now I don't have a dad anymore." As she spoke, Maria burst into tears. Sam silently embraced her, tears slipping from the corners of her eyes. She whispered, "We're all guilty. The sins were inexcusable. Noah was right. Neither of us had any right to ask for forgiveness." On the stage, I had returned to my usual self. In my arm was Anna, elegant, beautiful, and graceful. We walked toward the flower-laden stage. Surrounded by well-wishers, Sam watched it all through red-rimmed eyes. That night, Sam drank herself into a stupor again at the bar. By midnight, as she came to, her pain intensified. Groggy, she hailed a cab to the hospital, the very place where she had once performed Noah's surgery. She lay down on the cold operating table. The chill was bone deep. The scenes from that day replayed vividly in her mind. Noah had been strapped to this table, anesthetized. How cold must he have been? Tears fell as Sam curled up. A pain settled in her chest. She fell asleep. Just like that. Until the next morning when Sam awoke, she heard David's voice outside. "Crazy, everyone's gone crazy just because of Noah. They're all against me. What did I do wrong? The heart is Sam's fault. Why blame me? I thought she liked me, and I even thought about being with her, but now she's coming to blame me. My parents are crazy too. They used to hate Noah, that piece of trash, but now that he's dead, I've become the villain." He was coming in for a follow-up, and the frustration of the past few days led him to find a secluded corridor to vent to a friend on the phone. Every word was heard clearly by Sam in the operating room. The voice on the other end of the phone sounded nonchalant. "All right, stop pretending. You've got a healthy body now. Isn't that more valuable than anything else? Tell me the truth. Before the surgery, you really didn't know it was your brother's heart." Sam's heart suddenly tightened. David sneered and said, "I'm not an idiot. There was no donor heart before. Then suddenly one appeared. You don't need to be a genius to figure it out. I just pretended not to know. Otherwise, how could I keep up my image?" David continued, "His life was worthless, and it was already owed to me. The heart being given to me was only right. This whole situation is just annoying." Sam couldn't hold back any longer and rushed out of the operating room. David was startled. Seeing her, his first instinct was to run, but he was grabbed by Sam. "What did you just say?" David turned pale and stammered, "Nothing." "Sam, you must have misunderstood." Sam's face darkened, her voice trembling with anger as she bit her lip. "You knew from the beginning. You knew I was going to take Noah's heart and give it to you. You knew everything." David's face drained of color, but he still pretended to be clueless. "I don't know what you're talking about." Sam saw right through his act and shouted in rage, "It was all a lie. You pretended to like me, pretended to be weak. You've been deceiving all of us. I actually hurt Noah because of you. I'm so stupid." Sam laughed bitterly as if she had realized a massive joke at her own expense. David, realizing the situation was turning against him, quickly fled the hospital. Sam stood there, stunned. Suddenly, something clicked in her mind. She hurried to her office, pulled out David's medical records, and started reading through them one by one. Then, suddenly, she slapped herself hard across the face. The past medical records clearly showed that David's heart condition was nowhere near life-threatening. He had been fully aware of his heart issues, yet he still insisted on skydiving, which worsened his condition to the point where he needed a heart transplant. Even then, it wasn't an immediate necessity. In the hospital, he deliberately acted as if he were in excruciating pain and even avoided taking medication to try to worsen his condition, knowing that Sam would eventually help him. And indeed, Sam had found a way to help him by taking Noah's heart. When she realized all this, Sam felt like she deserved everything that had happened. She had been deceived by such a person, taking Noah's heart for him, making him suffer. What right did she have to ask for forgiveness? Now she had lost everything, the one who loved her, the one she loved, all because of David. What right did he have to use Noah's heart? With this thought, she left the hospital and headed straight for the Wong family home. At that moment, the Wong house was shrouded in gloom. David had just returned home and found his father sitting in the living room, furious, and his mother's face was as dark as ink. David, feeling somewhat uneasy, asked, "Mom, Dad, what are you doing here?" Wong's father stood up and, with a forceful slap, knocked him to the ground. David, still confused, exclaimed, "Dad, what are you doing?" Wong's father, in front of him, played a recording, the very one David had made in the hospital corridor. He had been recorded by Sam and sent to Wong father's phone the moment it happened. Wong's mother's face was full of disbelief, mixed with pain and disgust. She said, "We always thought you were a good child, but it turns out it was all an act. You deceived your own parents and harmed your own brother. You took his life." She pointed at him, loudly reproaching him, her words filled with anguish. David knew he could no longer hide the truth. With red eyes, unwilling to accept the reality, he shouted, "What does it have to do with me? I didn't cause him to die. It was you who drove him out of the Wong family. It was Sam who took his heart. I didn't do anything. I'm the one who's innocent. Weren't you the ones who hated him the most? You couldn't wait for him to die. And now that he really is dead, you're unhappy. What kind of parents do you think you are?" Wong's father's face turned bright red with anger. He clutched his chest and staggered. But David didn't care. With red eyes, he continued, "Since I was young, you've been telling me that Noah's heart disease was caused by Noah. He was born to owe me. Mom, didn't you say it would have been better if I had been the only one? Now that Noah is dead and his heart is inside me, can't you just pretend you only had one child?" David couldn't understand what had happened to his parents. They hadn't been like this before. Wong's mother was stunned by his words, glaring at him with disbelief. At this moment, she finally understood. The words she once said had truly come to pass. She whispered, "It's my fault." Wong's mother fell to her knees with a thud, clutching a photo of Noah crying in agony. "I failed you as a mother. I killed my own son." Tears fell from her eyes as if she had aged decades in an instant. When Sam arrived, she saw Wong's father convulsing on the floor and Wong's mother crying uncontrollably. David was standing by, watching coldly. He was about to leave. Sam blocked his path, her eyes red with fury. "Why did you harm Noah?" David was furious now and violently pushed Sam away. "Who harmed him? You. I didn't do anything. And you're all blaming me. But you're the selfish, hypocritical, narrow-minded, and venomous ones. You should thank me. If it weren't for me, his body would have been burned to ashes. At least now there's a heart beating inside me." Sam staggered back a couple of steps and then let out a low laugh. She didn't argue with David, but instead mocked herself. "Yeah, I'm selfish and hypocritical, narrow-minded and venomous. I killed Noah, but what gives you the right to have Noah's heart?" Saying this, Sam grabbed a nearby vase and smashed it over David's head. David fell to the ground, dizzy. Sam rushed at him, grabbing his throat. The sensation of suffocation took over, and David struggled desperately, but his body, still recovering from surgery, couldn't handle the strain. Soon his limbs grew weak, and he was unable to fight back. David's defiance melted away, replaced with fear. I was wrong. I shouldn't have said that. I didn't mean it. In an instant, his eyes widened in terror. Sam was holding a sharp surgical knife in her hand. David's voice trembled in fear. Sam, I really know I was wrong. Please, calm down. But Sam had stopped listening to anything. In her mind, the voices of David and Noah intertwined. One cruelly reminded her of how she had hurt the person she loved. The other mocked her, ridiculing her foolish and laughable actions, mocking her self-inflicted misery. When she regained her senses, she realized her hand was warm. Looking at what lay in her hand, Sam was transported back to that day in the operating room. The nurse had asked, "Dr. Liu, is it time for the transplant?" Without thinking, Sam immediately rejected. No, no transplant. This was Noah's heart. She wanted to return it to him, but looking around, she couldn't find me anywhere. She stood up, cradling the heart in her hands, and set off to find Noah. That night, the police discovered Sam lying in the snow, a pool of blood surrounding her. Wong's father had suffered a stroke and was lying in the villa. While Wong's mother had fainted from the shock, the investigation revealed a living organ donation case that shocked the whole city. The news exploded on social media. I learned about it 3 days later. Since the last time I parted with Sam, I had turned off my phone and ignored the outside world. I didn't want to get caught up in the past, but I didn't expect to hear from my father that Wang Corporation had collapsed. After Sam's arrest, the fact that the Wong family had exchanged one son's life for another's could no longer be hidden, and public opinion became chaotic. The hospitals under Wong Corporation closed, and everyone involved was arrested. Wang Corporation's stock prices plummeted, and it quickly declared bankruptcy. Wong's father, who had not received timely medical attention for his stroke, woke up to find himself paralyzed on one side of his body, unable to move or care for himself. Wong's mother, overwhelmed by grief, went insane, holding on to Noah's photo and refusing to let go. The once mighty Wong family had fallen. Lucas, who lost his father, was taken abroad by his mother. Sam was diagnosed with schizophrenia and sent to a mental institution. The once brilliant genius had now become a prisoner of her own mind, the subject of countless discussions and pity. When I visited the mental hospital, I saw a dazed Sam. She had lost much weight, her face was hollow, and her hair had been cut short, no longer the spirited woman she once was. When she saw me, her vacant eyes suddenly focused. She said, "You look like someone I used to know." I asked, "Who do I look like?" She said, "You look like my husband." Unfortunately, I hurt him. He won't forgive me, never. As she spoke, Sam suddenly laughed and cried, repeatedly saying, "He won't forgive me, never." As I left, I took one last look at Sam. I thought to myself, our 8 years of love and pain are now settled. I don't hate you anymore. Don't remember me either. Let's both start fresh. When I left, I went to the social welfare institution. After Sam was locked up, Maria was sent there. In the director's office, I donated a large sum of money to the institution and stood by the window. Maria, unlike the other children, was sitting alone drawing pictures. The director side said, "The child is still adjusting. Our teachers are very loving, and we have several children with autism here, and they've all adjusted very well." Several children walked up to Maria asking, "What are you drawing? Can we draw with you?" Maria, who used to not like playing with others, hesitated and nodded. I watched her for a long time before saying, "From now on, Gene Corporation will make annual donations to the Welfare Institute. I'll also come to check on this child from time to time. Please take good care of her." The director agreed repeatedly. As I was leaving, the director asked, "Aren't you going to see the child?" I thought for a moment and shook my head. It's better to leave the past behind. Seeing that Maria was doing well here, I was at ease. For the future, let's both look ahead. From now on, live your life well.